It's really despicable. It's despicable that somebody can say things about somebody and an organization. More importantly, 17-year-old kids. You're taking shots at 17-year-old kids and their families. They're all money. We bought every player on this group. We never bought anybody. No rules were broken. Nothing was done wrong. It's despicable that a reputable head coach could come out and say this when he doesn't get his way or things don't go his way. The narcissist in him doesn't allow those things to happen, and it's ridiculous. But when he's not on top, and the parity in college football he's been talking about, go talk to coaches who coach for him. You'll find out all the parity. Go dig into wherever he's been.
And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3. Come and hang out. Smash that like, smash that subscribe, jump on into the comments and join us. Thanks to all of you that are watching across the entire 24/7 Sports Facebook network. And if you are listening on the audio platform, thank you to you as well. You are day one OGs. If you want to give us a 5-star review, guess what? That's also an opportunity to put in a question for a future mailbag episode. Again, 5-star review, put your mailbag question in there. We will tackle it in a future edition of the mailbag. So much has happened since the last time we got together. It has been tumultuous. It has been spicy. And now I am so glad to be joined by you two here to get into, among other things, we're going to get into the CBS Sports Power 5 coach rankings. And before we get there, we do have to tackle some of the events of the last week. Shout out to Bud Elliott, who held it down solo on Thursday with what was, in the experience, a watch party for the Jimbo Fisher press conference as he went live right as Jimbo did as well. So gentlemen, how are we doing?
I'm good. Good. I'm glad that we finally got you out of prison. I'm happy to see you back on the show. How was prison life?
You really learn a lot about yourself. You really learn a lot about yourself. It was suggested that Bud Elliott used all of his sicko play earnings to bail me out. I cannot confirm or deny how I was able to join you all right now, but certainly there was a lot of creativity there. But I mean, it's good. It's good to be back. How are y'all doing?
For somebody who's locked up, you look pretty refreshed. You look like well rested. You look good. I'm fired up.
I was energetic to be back with you all. We already got to talk on your radio show earlier today about this very topic. So just to go through the very quick version, we've got number one, Nick Saban telling, as he sits on stage with other Alabama coaches, telling a room full of Alabama boosters, among other things, that Alabama, we were number 2, Texas A&M was number 1. They bought every player. Those fiery comments you saw from Jimbo Fisher, that was on the Thursday after the Wednesday night when those Nick Saban comments came out. Nick Saban circled back on Thursday afternoon with an apology, said he shouldn't have singled anyone out, and he was just talking about the issues in college football as a whole. Then by the end of the week, we get a public reprimand from SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. No, you boys start acting right, or else we're going to have a talk in the principal's office. So, I mentioned, Bud did a good summary of especially the Saban comments and passing along some of the Jimbo Fisher. Now that we've had the full Fisher press conference, now that we've had the Saban apology on Thursday afternoon and the SEC commissioner coming in and saying, you guys got to calm it down just a little bit. How are you entertained? Do you think there's something really to chew on other than just being some great talk about college football in May? What'd you make of the last week or so?
I thought it was hilarious more than anything. I mean, it's just Saban saying it like he apologized for it, and he said fine, but he knew what he was doing when he did it. It's Saban, for somebody who is as detailed and process oriented as he is as far as running that program. He didn't accidentally name drop Texas A&M. He didn't accidentally name drop, Deion Sanders and Jackson State. He was pissed. He's pissed that his team finished second in the recruiting rankings, and he's also pissed at his boosters for not having their stuff in order like Texas A&M does. Because all Saban wants to do is be the best at everything and win, and he sees that Texas A&M has been a little bit ahead of the curve on how to use this to their advantage and take advantage of it and get the kind of recruiting classes that Nick is usually, accustomed to putting together for Alabama. And for somebody as competitive as he is, he decided to let it out. And this is what we get.
You asked if it's entertaining. I mean, that's like
Yes.
the easiest layup question that's there. This has been the most entertaining we've had in college football probably since the championship game. I mean, this is phenomenal. It's great for everybody except Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, and the SEC, which is why I think they've all kind of dialed it back somewhat, because I do think Nick Saban, I totally agree with Tom. Like, I think he did this strategically, of a call to arms, if you will, for his boosters, collectives, name, image, and likeness opportunities. He wants to make sure that people know why they didn't have the number one class. Instead, Texas A&M did. So I think it was a wake-up call to some. Then I think he quickly dialed it back, because I do think, like, I put out a poll the other day because Nick Saban said, I've never bought a player. And I just did a general poll. Does anybody believe Nick Saban never bought a player? It was the most lopsided poll I've ever seen. 91% said they don't believe Nick Saban. The other 9% probably either they're probably part of the collectives or NIL groups or whatever it is that goes in this system to play Alabama players. So I think Nick Saban very quickly realized, especially with Jimbo Fisher's like threats of, really, you want to dig in your past? Let's go. That's the moment that Saban was like, whoa. This is not the direction I wanted this to go. Let's just dial it back some. And it kind of goes back to the agreement that this conference has had for the last 20 years of, what are we doing? Why would we air these things out publicly, open ourselves up to criticism and potentially NCAA investigations? Everyone quiet down. Let's go about business as usual. We'll keep winning championships and collecting checks. Everybody, shh. Like, that's basically what Sankey came in and did. And I think it's a smart thing, but I'm very curious to see. Obviously, you've got the October 8th date in Tuscaloosa, but more importantly and sooner than that, we'll get the SEC Media Days, because this is going to be put back on the table. And I'm just wondering if everyone plays nice, and it's probably Jimbo, but imagine like Lane Kiffin. You think he's going to keep his mouth shut after watching all this? There's only one guy I think that really wants everyone quiet, and it's Kirby. Kirby's just sitting back like, yeah, you guys keep just knocking each other off. I'll look at my championship ring and we'll dial it back up. I think it's going to be interesting to see if everybody can play nice at SEC Media Days.
What's hilarious,
that to me has become must-see TV now.
You mentioned Lane Kiffin. It's funny because, like, if you've read any like the articles that have stemmed from this, like Bruce Feldman wrote one at The Athletic where he was like, quoting coaches, like their reactions to it, and other sites have done it. Every single coach in all these stories is speaking anonymously, except for Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin's like, yeah, no, put me on the record. I thought it was insane.
Yeah, he said I didn't get any work done. I just sat there and stared at my screen with my mouth open. He said he was in shock. And it's funny because there are a lot of connections. Jimbo Fisher did the very pointed thing, and something that was that made it more. What made it to me as personal as it could possibly get was him mentioning Bobby Bowden as a foil to Nick Saban and saying, you work with Bobby Bowden and you understand how to treat people and how to do things. And I have not gone back to work for that guy again. Like, that is very, very personal. And that hits to like the core of how you feel about this situation right now. And I look at the rest of that community because, we've heard that there is a group chat of a bunch of Saban assistants. I have never heard that Jimbo Fisher was a part of that group chat. I think it's more of like I think that Lane is in all of the different circles, but like Muschamp and Jimbo used to have a beach house together that they shared at one point. I don't know if that's still going on, but the coaching tree of Nick Saban, I kind of want to see the group chats. Like what are Lane and Kirby and Muschamp and all these guys when they're texting each other? Because when Jimbo Fisher says, go talk to anybody who's worked for him, it's like, well, guess what? Let's go in to talk to these guys right now. I think that everything remains calm, but I do wonder, to your point about SEC Media Days, where there are former Nick Saban assistants all over the place. I got to think that anybody with any connection to Nick Saban is going to get a question about this, if not at media days, at least in some of the talking season that leads up to the regular season, right?
It's like when you're friends with a couple and you're friends with both the people in the couple and you're friends with them for a long time, and then they go through a very public breakup, and now you've got to try to navigate the waters of like, am I still both their friends? Am I only going to be one of their friends? How am I going to do it? I think that's what's going on in a lot of these coaching group texts right now. It's like, well, who do we support? What do we do? Whose side are we on? It's just like, how do we do this? How do we handle this? Can we invite them both to the same party? I don't know.
Don't you think clearly, I think what Saban is doing, right? I mean, there's again, strategic of what he's doing. I think one, it's a call to arms, but I also feel, because he did make the parody comment, which was bizarre.
And that was before that, right?
That was like
Tuesday.
10 days before maybe.
Right.
And it was one of those ones like everyone was like, what are you talking about? You've never experienced parody. Like, yeah, you'd love to go back the way things were. I do feel like some of this is coming from a place where Saban realizes he's losing his edge that he's had for 15 years at Alabama by being able to dominate the recruiting space, dominate, the coaching staffs, just dominate pretty much every area. So he has a significant edge, and he knows that. And he knows that's a big reason why he's been able to become the greatest coach ever. And I think he's not struggling, but maybe he's trying to figure out a way so he doesn't lose that edge. And I think that's a very real struggle for him that he's trying to navigate so he doesn't lose it, because it's going to be a lot. I mean, we already saw him beat last year by Texas A&M. We saw the first assistant beat him. I think there's a portion of this which to me does feel like we are getting close to the end of the Nick Saban era, because I think there's frustration and this public criticism now that he's going to get. And if he does have this target on his back and more former players and coaches start speaking out about the way things really work at Bama, I just wonder how much longer he's on that sideline.
I think that he's going to be able to play like go get free agents every year from the transfer portal and run them out there to see if they can go win a national championship. I mean, there was something about his disappointment with those. I'm thinking about the wide receivers. I'm thinking about, Ajay Hall, Jaleel Billingsley. I don't know. Look at any of the Alabama players that have transferred out of the program. Many of them who have ended up at Texas right now. And just if he's not at that point where it's like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this every single year, but the bigger operation clearly is not going to be running. The player development is not working in the same way. The way that you stack top recruiting classes and they end up, you're constantly churning over such that your Mark Ingram goes to Trent Richardson, goes to, Damian Harris, like the
Derrick Henry,
like the everything that about the industrial complex seems like it's in its late era, right? Like we are really starting to see the dominance start to be challenged. And if Nick Saban wants more parity, it's probably because he doesn't want anybody to catch him in the title race, right? Like, let's share the wealth a little bit, right as I'm on my way out right now. But I agree with you, Danny. I do. All of this from the parity on has made me wonder if Nick Saban is starting to be fed up with all the changes that he's having to make. I mean, he was against what? I know Bud on last Thursday mentioned he was against hurry up offenses. Right. He was like, he came out and he was like, is this what we want football to be? He was against the satellite camps. He was against all of these different developments and all of this. I don't know if it was all progress, but changes within college football. And then he's ultimately adapted. I don't know if he's got it in him. I don't know. I don't want to say that. I wonder if this last adaptation is something that adaptation is going to be something that he's excited about.
What's funny is you mentioned like Nick being, is this what we want football to be as far as like the up-tempo offenses? And while this was long before it, him saying it, part of the rift between him and Jimbo, from what I've read, is that when Jimbo was his offensive coordinator at LSU, like part of Jimbo's problem with Nick is that Nick's at the time was very much, my defense is going to win us the games. Your job is just to not screw things up. And that was always a kind of a cause of friction between him and Saban, in that has got clearly carried on in other directions. So I do think it's funny that it's kind of ironic that it comes to that. But I also just kind of want to talk about the fact that, like, I'm on Jimbo's side here, Like, I think what Nick did was wrong. I think naming names was wrong and doing it in a public setting. Like, he could have gotten the message he wanted to get across to his boosters without specifically calling out Texas A&M or any other school. And while we would have been able to do the math ourselves, still, he didn't have to do it. There's a kind of a code that I do feel like Saban broke. So I understand why Jimbo's mad. But I also want to point out that Jimbo heard these comments, called together a press conference, had the school announce the press conference hours ahead of time, put it out. It's going to be at 10 a.m. Central. Forced a bunch of media people to come down to the news conference, TV networks, local networks, national networks, had the press conference broadcast nationally across the country, ESPN, SEC Network, all these other places. He did all that and then called another man a narcissist. Like, bro, you could have just put out a statement saying, I feel that Nick's comments were out of line, blah, 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 yada, yada. No, you called a press conference and made sure everybody was watching it and then called somebody else a narcissist. And that, to me, is the funniest part of the entire thing.
CFP and on checking in. They're both in on it.
That is outstanding.
Yeah,
That's a great observation. That's so good. Why do you think? Because I don't believe anybody. I don't believe any of them. Like Jimbo's like, we did all this the right way. I don't believe him either. I think he did it a legal way because you can now, and until the courts decide. I mean, I guess technically Jimbo might be worried that the NCAA could come snooping around and some of the threats and this new task force that maybe he's trying to do it. And I guess maybe that could be why he's so adamant that we did it the right way. But clearly that class was not built on relationships alone. Like, this wasn't a relational recruiting class. It's more transactional, but why are you still trying to proclaim it with such authority as we did it the right way when you could do it that way? That's the one thing I'm a little bit confused by. And maybe it is. Maybe coaches are really worried about the unknown of what could be coming down the pipe rather soon with this task force if they start digging around, these programs. Because from what I've read, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of the same things, like, they're not going to go after the players and deem the players ineligible. They'll come after the coaches and, the universities with, $1 million fines are some of the threats that I've seen. So maybe that's what it is. But I was a little bit curious as to why Jimbo was so adamant that he didn't do anything wrong either.
I think I know why. Because I think that if you look at this class, I will take Jimbo at his word, and I will believe him when he says that everything Texas A&M did to put together this class, they did by following the rules that now exist that allow them to do that. Fine. But let's not forget, Jimbo has also said in recent interviews, and I don't have the direct quote, but to paraphrase, when he's been asked what's different about recruiting now in this NIL thing, he's basically said, well, nothing's changed for me. We're doing the same stuff. It's just all out in the open now. So I think that's why Jimbo is possibly worried about things coming around, snooping around Texas A&M, because maybe before NIL, there were some things done that everybody's doing that maybe, he doesn't want to be found out.
I think Jimbo's fed up. Remember, sliced bread was his last big tirade. And when Lane Kiffin talked about the luxury tax, that got on his nerves. And, it's been mentioned that there's lots of reasons why he might want to squash rumors of a $25,000 or $25 million recruiting class, including what it could mean for you trying to line up deals for future recruits. But I think that there has got to be some part of Jimbo's fiery response. Yes, a lot of it was pointed at Nick Saban, somebody who he called a narcissist, who said, we make him out to be God. Go find out how God, got his success and things like that. That was very personal, very directed at Nick Saban. But in general, his defensiveness about the recruiting class goes back to National Signing Day. His defensiveness about this recruiting class feels like he has been attacked by multiple different levels. And I think that that's got to be a big part of his own, I am going to do this as publicly and as loud as possible right now.
But from a human psychology standpoint, let's look at ourselves. When do we get the most upset by somebody's criticism of us?
When it's right?
Yeah. When they hit the nail on the head. That's when we get upset. So just consider that.
All right. One more part of this that I want to pose, because I truthfully don't know if I'm all in on this, but it has been mentioned by several within the college football ecosystem that we are getting excited or entertained by the back and forth between these two, the history they have, the significance of what it means on the field, but they are, within the large context of what both of them were saying, they were calling for some, real, structural change. They are doing the same thing that a lot of college coaches are, in ringing an alarm bell and saying that, this is not sustainable. We need help. They are calling on the federal government. They are using the word antitrust without any other, I think they're just checking off the buzzword, right? Like, at some point you got to say antitrust without actually explaining, what it has to do with anything. That's what I'm picking up from it. So do you think that within these messages that are being sent, is that just another thread that is frustrating every single coach? Or do you think that these two very, very public coaches, so two of the few coaches to have active coaches to have national championships, I think there's only 4 in college football right now.
Mhm.
Five in college football right now. These are 2 of them. Do you think that they had any success in using their platform and continuing this conversation of college coaches asking for help from federal government, asking for change at the NCAA governance level? Did that message get lost within the rest of all of the rest of this?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think it's lost forever, but I think I think that we just had a period there where that was the biggest issue being discussed, and then, as so often happens, the tabloid headline hits and kind of pushes that to the back. But I still think that's a situation that's being dealt with and being addressed, and coaches are going to continue to push, especially like Danny was saying earlier. Once we get to SEC media days, they're not going to be this discussion will be used for some questions about it, but it will lead to a discussion more about what we have or what coaches want them to do about NIL and guidelines and all that stuff going forward.
It's not good. I think it put it on the back burner a little bit, but this isn't going away. I mean, this is give Pat Narduzzi a microphone at the ACC media days. What do you think he's going to say, about the need for structure? I mean, that every single coach that I talk to, and it's really on or off the record, are just we need something. We need some guidelines. We can't keep operating this way. And it's because coaches are very structure oriented. They want to know the structure, so then they can figure out how do we best utilize it, and they'll push the boundaries, right? But for the most part, most of them they don't want to get in trouble for it. So now I think clearly there are some schools that are more willing to push that envelope and some that aren't. And I think all of them are frustrated. Probably the ones that are trying to at least avoid the appearance of pay for play are probably a little more frustrated. They're saying, well, what about that? What about that class? Kind of what we're seeing, these accusations fly around. And I think everyone just wants some answers as far as what are we allowed to do? Tell me what we can and can't do, even though it's there. I think the frustrating thing is that there's schools that aren't listening to those. And if you look at, I know attorneys are confident and cocky, but I don't think I've ever seen a group as cocky as the agents and lawyers that are representing the players in these NIL deals. I mean, have you read their comments? They're like, oh, that's cute. The NCAA is going to try to prevent these. Good luck. Go ahead, take us to court. We'll have a lawsuit filed the next day. They are extremely confident. John Ruiz, the booster at Miami, is like, I am ironclad. There is nothing they're going to do to get us in trouble. So it's just the need for answers and direction on what you can and can't do is just, that should be at the forefront. And yet if we're asking for help from Congress or politicians, that has me concerned. Is this going to get resolved anytime soon? And I'd say the answer is no.
We'll have the big existential, what is football going to be, will just continue to be a thread that, of course, we're going to end up talking about throughout the offseason and until it's resolved. And I come back to something that Danny was saying, I think it was on a podcast. If not, it was when we were just having a conversation pre or post show, which is we love college football so much. That's why we always talk about ways to make it better. We are not complaining about the sport that we cover because just to complain or to be negative. We really want this to be the best possible version of the sport. And it is in a period of transition. So we'll continue to keep everything going as we look ahead to what the sport will be in the future. So all that happened between 2 coaches. I mentioned of them, 2 of them who have national championship rings. They are also the number 1 and the number 5 coach on the CBS Sports Power 5 coach rankings. We will break down that CBS Sports Power 5 coach rankings list, as well as share some of our own thoughts from our own ballots and more next.
This Memorial Day, summer takes off.
Here we go.
Top Gun Maverick. It's a cinematic triumph.
Damn right.
It's jaw-dropping.
Nice.
And a masterful adrenaline rush.
Come on! Smoke in the air! Right.
That's heart-stopping. And one of the greatest movies ever made.
Let's give him 10.
Yes! Outstanding.
Top Gun Maverick. Rated PG-13.
Let's go. Top Gun Maverick coming out Memorial Day weekend. And maybe we'll do I don't know if we can do a watch party. Maybe we'll do a reaction, an instant reaction. Top Gun Maverick episode.
Then we can write it off as a business expense.
Are they putting that in? They've got to be putting those in like the big like IMAX and stuff theaters, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sign me up. I'll take 2 young boys under the age of 2 and just throw them in there with earplugs. Let them show what adrenaline looks like. All right, Power 5 coach rankings on CBS Sports, an annual off-season piece here for us at CBSSports.com. Ballots are distributed to a lot of the CBS Sports expert. We fill them out 1 through 65. The consensus is put together and posted very quickly. The top 10, Nick Saban at 1, Kirby Smart at 2, Dabo Swinney at 3, Lincoln Riley at 4, Jimbo Fisher at 5, followed by Ryan Day at 6, Brian Kelly at 7, Kyle Whittingham at 8, Jim Harbaugh at 9, and Mike Gundy at 10. Now, there's a couple pieces of information that we need to share with the listeners and the viewers. Number one is Tom Fornelli's name is on the author line of these posts. That means that he has tirelessly written out 65 blurbs explaining what led the coach to that ranking. It is not his actual rankings, which means that here on the Cover 3 podcast, we get to actually hear where he ranked some of these coaches. Not necessarily a message that always gets across. The second piece of information is that everyone has different ways to go about ranking. You can take your number of career wins. You can take recency bias. You know, there's a lot of coaches with very different resumes and profiles, and it's very difficult to stack them up against each other. And number 3, being a Power 5 coach is a good thing. Okay, if you are on this list, it means you are employed by a power conference university to be a head football coach. You have done something right. So I just want to, I'm not going participation trophy on this, but I do want to point out that just even being on this list is a good thing, even if you're down at 40 whatever or 50 something, because it means that you aren't awful. Because if you were awful, you wouldn't be on this list. You'd be fired and you'd be a coordinator somewhere else. So Tom, I want to start by throwing it to you. Before we get into some of our, I've got risers and fallers, a couple identified. You got a couple of coaches that I know from my ballot I struggled with or wanted to discuss. But what are some of the strongest takeaways from going over this list 1 through 65?
My biggest takeaway, honest to God, as I was doing all this was that, I mean, I don't have our full panel of voters. I don't know everybody who did it, but I know that every year.
Yeah, I want names. Yeah, I want names.
I know there are some new people that enter every year and some people who leave, but man, there is some, like, the SEC bias that you hear about. It exists in these rankings very strongly. Like
that and recency bias, I think.
Yeah.
Well, recency bias, you're never going to be able to avoid, but like just examples, like, as I'm going through these things and I'm writing these the other week, like Shane Beamer was 65 last year, went 7-6 at South Carolina, which exceeded all of our expectations. He climbs 24 spots. I don't have a problem with Shane Beamer climbing 24 spots because he really did. He what was the win total? 3.5.
Yeah, I was going to say he doubled the win total.
Yeah, so cool. But then they're not SEC yet, but Steve Sarkisian climbed 7 spots in the rankings after a disappointing year at Texas. The only thing that changed is Texas joined the SEC. And then finally, Josh Heupel at Tennessee was 52 last year, climbs 19 spots to 33 after going 7-6. And again, you exceed expectations, but you went 7-6. Meanwhile, Pat Narduzzi, he went 11-3, won the ACC, got Pitt to the Peach Bowl. His quarterback was a Heisman finalist. He climbed 4 spots. Granted, he was at 31, so he's only got so much room to climb, and it's much more difficult to climb once you start getting higher. But still, a coach is climbing 20-something spots for going 7-6. Pat Narduzzi's winning a power conference. He's climbing 4 spots. Meanwhile, guys like Mel Tucker and Dave Aranda jumped into the top 15, top 20 for having good seats. Like Michigan State didn't win the Big Ten. You want to throw Aranda up there because he had a great year and won the Big 12? Fine. I like Dave Aranda too. I also like Mel Tucker. Do I think that they've accomplished more in their careers to this point than Pat Narduzzi? No. So
another one, Sam Pittman ahead of Pat Narduzzi.
Yes.
Coming in at top 22. And Sam Pittman had a really nice year, but what Narduzzi has done at Pitt is completely more impressive. And he's done it over time. He's done it longer. Like we've seen coaches have one good year at Arkansas before and then quickly, go back to norm. I'll be very curious to see how that unfolds.
So yeah, I feel like if you're an SEC coach, like you get 5 spots per win, pretty much.
I think it is very easy to put Pat Narduzzi in the top 40, and I think it is more difficult to put him in the top 20 when you're actually shaking out your list.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like a lot of coaches in the 20 to 40 range, it can get a little tricky when you're breaking those ties right there. I had Pat Narduzzi at number 31 on my ballot. And, he has averaged about 8 wins a season. He has won the Coastal Division twice. He has now won an ACC championship. There's absolutely an argument based on this past season for him to be moving up a little bit higher. The high floor proposition, I think, also gets you that high floor ranking, but it is difficult in terms of being able to jump past some of those other coaches. Mike Leach is right ahead of him in our consensus rankings. Mike Leach, are you taking the full body of work into consideration? Like, are we going Texas Tech, Washington State, where Washington State had at least one really good season, double-digit wins, contend for a Pac-12 North title, and then at Mississippi State, has very much dug into a place of consistency here in his first couple seasons. Like Pat Narduzzi and Mike Leach, I feel like Mike Leach's body of work is a little bit bigger, so I could understand why you would rank Leach ahead of him without needing the SEC bump that the SEC coaches are getting.
Well, I had Leach at 21 and Narduzzi at 22.
Where'd you have Mark Stoops?
Mark Stoops I had at 11.
Wow. There's an SEC bump for you.
That's the thing though. That's sustained. Like he's been doing that at Kentucky now. He's at won at least 10 games 3 times now in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I had him at 12.
Yeah, I feel like to be able to do that at Kentucky is for the same reason I had Ferentz high, ranked at 14. Just being able to do that at a program like that and sustain it, I think, is more valuable than Dave Aranda having one great season at Baylor after having a terrible season at Baylor the year before. You know what I mean? So I feel like Stoops has accomplished more. That's why I have Aranda at 18, Stoops at 11. I have him ahead of Matt Campbell. I have him ahead of Fitzgerald. I have him ahead of Ferentz, Harbaugh, Franklin, because I think that he's had a much better sustained record of it.
What'd you do with James Franklin?
James Franklin, I have it at 16.
I have him at 11, and I don't like it. I opened up my ballot for prep, and I was like, I could really make some arguments for some of those coaches that I got in there at 12, 13, 14, 15 for being ahead of Franklin. Franklin, of course, I give him credit for what he did at Vanderbilt, as well as being able to have for about 2 to 3 seasons, Penn State really was one of the most successful teams of the playoff era to not make the playoff. In those offseason, who's the next team that's going to reach their first college football playoff? You'd always put them up there. There's things have gotten a little bit shaky here in the last 2 years. I think that's why there's a lot of expectations and excitement going into this year. But I don't know what the bias is for that on Franklin. Maybe it was valuing some of his work as a recruiter as well, and also not only recruiting players, but don't you think James Franklin is a plus value staff hiring?
Mm-hmm.
His coaching staffs are pretty good, as evidenced by what they've gone on to do in the head coaching opportunities that they've gotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that you look at the last 2 years, and you got to start knocking them a little bit. Doesn't mean he can't climb right back up into the top 10 with another strong season, but Penn State's been bad the last 2 seasons. It's been a mediocre football team, and that's some of that responsibility has to lay at his feet.
Ryan Day of Ohio State seems to be one that is drawing a lot of conversation. I had him at number 4 on my ballot. He was at number 6 on the consensus. Ryan Day has 0 bad losses. He's been the head coach for 3 full seasons, and he has taken a defeat in the national championship game. He has lost in the college football playoff. He was defeated by the eventual Pac-12 North champions and the eventual Big Ten champions. Those are the 4. That's it. 3 seasons, 4 losses, 0 bad losses for Ryan Day. He was at number 4 last year. He dropped 2 spots to number 6. Is Ryan Day rightly rated compared to his surroundings, where you've got Lincoln Riley at 4, Jimbo Fisher at 5, and then Brian Kelly at 7, Kyle Whittingham at 8?
I had Day at 7.
Ooh, okay.
My top here, I had Saban at 1, Dabo at 2, Kirby at 3, Kelly at 4, Jimbo 5, Lincoln 6, and then Ryan Day 7. And I think that while Ryan Day's had a great career, and like you said, he doesn't have a bad loss, Saban's won titles, Swinney's won titles, Kirby just won a title, Brian Kelly's been to multiple title games, into the playoff, multiple times. Jimbo's won a national title. Lincoln Riley's been to the playoff 3 times. So it's like Ryan Day hasn't really accomplished any more than any of those 6 coaches.
He's got a playoff win.
He does.
Which is something Lincoln does. I thought the Lincoln Ryan Day one was interesting because they were they're similar. Now Lincoln Riley's had more time to build up a better record and get more playoff appearances.
Heisman winners.
Both handed the reins, of a winning program from a great coach. That one was tough for me because I thought Lincoln Riley was too high in the consensus one at 4. And then I was like, all right, who do you drop out? Who do you put under? And I thought you could maybe make a case for Ryan Day over Lincoln Riley, but the timeline is there. Lincoln Riley's had more time to consistently win.
Yeah, I think there's a great case for Ryan Day ahead of Lincoln Riley. For my decision, it really came down to my top 5 were my top 5. I didn't really have any questions about those. And then it was Riley or Day for 6. And I just went with Riley because the one thing, I've been with Ryan Day, when he took over a program that was in great shape. I mean, Urban Meyer built that thing. And my question for Ryan Day was, how are they going to be able to maintain it? And I think Ryan Day is doing an excellent job of maintaining it. I think he's doing as well as could be expected. My concern is that maintenance has been mostly on the offensive side of the ball. And I think defensively, that's a program that has slipped in recent years. And now maybe, bringing in Jim Knowles to run the defense will be what fixes it. And if that's the case, then they're going to win the Big Ten. They're going to get to the playoff. And of course, Ryan Day is going to jump up again just because of that. But I do think there has been some slippage on the defensive side of the ball under Ryan Day that wasn't there when Urban was there. So that to me was kind of the deciding factor in knocking him just below Lincoln.
Herm Edwards falls 34 spots in these rankings. That does not come as a huge surprise. Brian Harsin falls 21 spots in those rankings. I think that's probably it is.
That's a different kind of SEC bias.
There is no way that as a voter, you cannot be influenced by the way that the last 4 months have gone for Auburn football and not think that there's going to be some impact on the way that you view Brian Harsin compared to his contemporaries. Now I move to another one of our big droppers. And it's so interesting. You mentioned, Tom, that by the nature of these rankings, it is much easier to make a big jump up than there is to have a big drop because we had 29 coaching changes across all of FBS. 14 of them came at the Power 5 level. And a lot of new coaches are just going to start these rankings down near the bottom, especially if you're a first-time head coach. Hello, Jake Dickert at Washington State, Mike Elko at Duke. You can build out 65 through 58 or 57 pretty easily so that you don't have these massive drops. But Indiana's Tom Allen dropped 20 spots.
Mm-hmm.
Are we shaky on the Tom Allen experience, or is this a cooling off of the excitement of the Hoosiers having one of their most successful seasons in decades in recent years?
I can't speak for everybody, but let's see. Where did I have Tom? I had Tom at 32. He finished at 40 in our rankings. Clearly, somebody's very, very low. on Tom Allen amongst our voting panel. But I think, yeah, I think part of it was, like we mentioned earlier, like the recency bias is always going to play a huge role. And I just think that in last year's rankings, the story of Indiana in that COVID season was one of the, better stories of the college football season. For the Hoosiers to have that kind of year, that come out of nowhere, play that well, I think that just boosted Allen's stock a lot when it came to putting together rankings. Because I think too, when you go through these, like, everybody has different ways that they're ranking coaches. Like, some might just be ranking them strictly as recruiters, some might just be ranking them strictly for what they've done, whatever. But I think that no matter how you do it, you tend to have your top 20, and then you have your bottom 10, and then everything else in between. You're really splitting hairs. You're kind of just putting personal preferences. And I think that coming off of a winless season in the Big Ten, it was very easy for some voters to just keep knocking Allen down and putting other guys ahead of him. And that's probably what played the biggest role in his drop.
I had him at 28.
Really?
Yeah, so
Love each other,
we're
baby.
still,
Love each other.
clearly you and I are probably on the higher end, considering he finished 40. Like, I'm guessing somebody had him in the 60s or the high 50s at a minimum.
I think he's a good football coach. I think he does a good job of motivating players and getting you ready for Saturdays, program development, like all of that stuff. I think that Tom Allen is a great college football coach. And again, just being on this list, I think you are a very good college football coach. I've got him in the top half of my 65. Okay, big risers. You mentioned Dave Aranda, who jumped
the largest rise of any coach in the history of these rankings.
51.
Yeah.
51 spots.
He went from 62 to 11.
They had him in the bottom 5, and now he is up to number 11.
And I had him at 18 on mine, and as I was doing it, I was like, is this too high?
So somebody had him higher. I had him at 13, which again, some
people had him in their top 10, clearly. How's he getting to 11 if he's not in people's top 10?
Is the stock price too hot on Dave Aranda right now?
I think so. I love Dave Aranda. I hate to say it, but I think that some people are a little too high. I'd like to see a sustained run before we can.
And I think some people are too results driven, like recency bias, but also the recency of, like, would you win this year? Like Kirby jumping Dabo is a little bit ridiculous.
That is the worst ranking of all.
Right. I mean, it just shouldn't, and it shouldn't be an insult to Kirby. Like, it is. You just can't make a really strong case other than he just beat Nick Saban. Like, that's it. Which Kirby was already done.
If Kirby put in a ballot, I bet he would have Dabo ahead of himself.
Right.
He's won multiple national titles. It's like, hello.
Yeah, what was it? 6 straight college football playoff appearances. I mean,
Clemson's down year was what, 11-3?
10-3. Yeah.
10-3. It's like, oh, they had a terrible season. They went 10-3.
Mel Tucker jumped 33 spots in these rankings after a strong season for the Spartans this past year. Is that too hot?
Based on my ballot, yeah, because he finished where he's at
24 on the consensus.
24.
Went from 57 to 24.
And I had him at 27 on my ballot. So not like I'm fine if you want Mel Tucker in your top 25, because I don't think, we should just base it off last year. But I think that the way I look at things, I think Mel Tucker had a great season last year. And I think if I'm a Michigan State fan, I'm very optimistic going forward. But what remains to be seen is we saw him hit a lot of home runs in the transfer portal. We don't know yet if that's a sustainable route to success.
Mm-hmm. I gave him credit for that, by the way. I had him right on the money at number 24 on my ballot. And a lot of it was not just the win total, but the idea that he was able to take not just Kenneth Walker III, but a lot of key players and be able to get them in 1 year to all buy into the program and be able to go out there and execute. I think Mel Tucker is a very good football coach, as evidenced by his long time as a coordinator at a very high level. And so Michigan State feels like a good spot for him to be able to be the best version of himself as a college football coach. I like him as a top 25 coach. It was a huge jump. And I almost laughed, like, what are we adjusting based on contracts too?
Right. That's what I was saying. He better be a top 25 coach getting that money.
We're trying to make the athletic department of Michigan State feel better about itself.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Any other coaches or names that jumped out to y'all in terms of, where they stood on the list compared to other coaches, what kind of moves they made, anything like that?
I think it's good to see Kyle Whittingham finally getting the credit he deserves for what he's been doing at Utah. And maybe there's some recency bias in there because of the way they played against Ohio State, but I think he's consistently been one of the more underrated coaches in college football. And it's good to see him in this list. I mean, he deserves to be there.
He's the first coach that you go to outside of the capital B Blue Bloods. Like who's the best non, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, LSU, like who's the best coach outside of that? It's without a doubt, in my mind, Kyle Whittingham. He was number 7 on my ballot, number 8 on the overall rankings. And they did, as you mentioned, just won the Pac-12 for the very first time since joining the league. Phenomenal year. Hey, we got a great question here from the chat. As always, thanks to everybody. Come and smash that like button, hit subscribe so that you can jump in on the conversation when we record live here on youtube.com/cover3. Where would Luke Fickell, the head coach of Cincinnati, land on this list? And this can just be sort of our opinion based on everything else is static. And, what is the neighborhood that you think Cincinnati coach Luke Fickell would be? Of course, Cincinnati will be a Power 5 program when they join the Big 12. And if the Power 5 still exists, if we're not in the College Football Super League by then we'll be putting together these rankings then as well. And Luke Fickell, if he's at Cincinnati, will have a chance to be stacked up against the rest. But where would you all put Luke Fickell if we added him to this pool of candidates?
I don't know exactly where, but he'd be in my top 10, and I think he would end up in the top 10 overall too, especially coming off a playoff berth.
Yeah, I think you put him ahead of Matt Campbell. Somebody who's highly rated.
I think that I'm looking at my top 10. I've got Saban
Ahead of Dave Aranda?
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Right? Longer track record, better, more consistent.
Mike Gundy is the pivot point for me.
I think Mike Gundy's still underrated for what he's been able to accomplish over a long period of time.
That's true. Longevity is
at a place that's not easy. I think I don't know, man. I think Gundy's a little. Now they had their little slip up here the last 4 or 5 years, but man, they got it. It seems like they're getting closer to getting back on that perennial 10-win season type of deal.
I think I'd have Fickell about 8 or 9. I'm trying to decide whether I'd have him in front of or behind Whittingham, but he's not going to be any lower than 9 on my ranking. And
you mentioned, they had a couple years where they slipped up a little bit. Slipping up a little bit was still going 7-6, 8-5, 8-3.
Mm-hmm.
This is a program that for the most part is finishing in the top 3 of the Big 12 every single season. It is more often than not finishing as one of the top 25 teams in the country for the last 14 seasons. I mean, it is a true model of consistency where if you compare him to everybody else, it's awesome. The problem is if you just compare him to Oklahoma and specifically his record in that game, I think that's why he ends up being a little underrated.
I also think too, the slipping up is 8-5, 7-6. But if you go to the pre-Gundy era, 8-5, 7-6 seasons were probably the goal. So now it's going 8-5 or 7-6 is so he's had a down year. And that's just kind of speaks to the impact he's had there.
Well, it is the full Power 5 coach rankings. You can check them out at cbssports.com. Tom Fornelli wrote all of the blurbs, but he did not decide all of the numbers. Please remember that when you aggregate his content, that these are the consensus rankings that many of us voted on. But,
all you have to do to know is to actually read it. It says it right there in the post.
We need to include it in all 65 blurbs just to make sure that we go ahead and draw it. And the fun thing about this is it allows us to enter the season with a real look at where these coaches stand. And then we come back next May, shuffle it again, new risers, new fallers, and a whole new debate for the best coaches in college football. You can follow him on Twitter at Danny Cannell. You can follow him at Tom Fornelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Chip is free.